Okay. Yeah, good. I know. I wanted to be just standing there. Okay. Where did I actually leave off? Because I know I just picked up the plasma cutter. I think we sex kind of on the flat. Okay. Um. Yeah. But yeah. Okay. I really don't know where it cut off. Actually. I know I talked about. Well, let's just go on to the plasma cutter. Fuck it. I mean, we were there anyways. Thing about it though is that it's kind of an OP weapon, sort of. Yeah. Kind of an issue with it is that the game doesn't present itself as really, oh hey, here's a new weapon, please use it. Instead, it just sort of keeps you with this. You can buy new weapons at shops peppered throughout the game as you progress. But like, I never felt compelled to. This weapon kind of follows many of the major design philosophies and principles that are inherent in the game. Thank you, Redwood Studios, of prior or courtesy of EA. Specifically the limb cutting bit. Well, we're going to get to that here in probably just a quick second. But it's yeah, it's kind of a relatively odd design decision when we get into it about the weaponry. I mean, you offer me other weapons, but this one seems to be the best of the bunch. And the other ones, while they seem to be useful in their own ways, never really surpassed this one. Yeah, and then on the bit about the lighting, yeah, I was just talking about the lighting basically in terms of the fact that the game was using strobe 3D lighting, similar to what you see in a lot of major sci-fi pictures. A lot of major motion pictures use it. Specifically those by Ridley Scott, again, filmmaker, made Alien, Blade Runner, things like that. Specifically, it creates a sense of 3D space when technically the space isn't 3D. In the case of film, you're looking at a 2D image, and the strobe light effect gives depth to said image without the need for any sort of 3D, glasses trickery. And in the case of a video game, when we're talking about 3D geometry, yes, virtually speaking, technically it's 3D. But it's still on a 2D plane. It's not something I can touch. I can't dip my hand into this. So when you see 3D strobe lighting like that, which I don't think I see that very often in video games lately, it does. It creates a sense of sort of immersion. It really, really, really lays thick on atmosphere. It's just a really neat effect that I wish more would use. Now here's this guy. Okay. Okay, so this is going to be like the majority of encounters in the game. Now, I'm sure the game is about to stop me, if I'm not mistaken. It's going to pause me and let me know through both dialogue from two other characters and through contextual menus that the point of the game, as far as enemy encounters go, is that you can totally conserve ammo. If you don't try to just shoot them directly in the torso, you can totally try to aim for their arms, for the legs, things like that. Why would you do this, you might ask? Well, it's kind of the main design philosophy of enemy encounters in the game. These things, which have not been named yet, they are called necromorphs, if I'm not mistaken. Kind of an interesting play on xenomorph, another alien reference. These things are humanoid-esque monstrosities, beasts made up of bony, hyper-textured, weird torso appendages, things like that. You've got bone saw knives coming out of their hands, weird fangs, their heads look strange, kind of look like somebody was split open sort of, but then got melded with some other people, similar to John Carpenter's The Thing, which is probably another point of design reference for the Redwood team. And because of their general anatomy, because they're so weirdly thin and looking very hungry and kind of decaying and, corpse-like, with the plasma cutter specifically, it's probably the easiest weapon to do it with. You can literally slice them into pieces, and by doing so, you're actually A, doing more damage to the enemy, and B, you're slowing down their advances, because as you'll see as we're playing through the game, the enemies are going to get a lot faster, they're going to get a lot more disagreeable, they're going to be a lot more prone to just trying to kill you as fast and as effectively as possible. So yeah, so that's that. But again, back on the plasma cutter for just a second, because I hate to keep harping on this, but really, it is probably my major issue with this game. As neat a weapon as it is, and as cool a concept as is this idea of, strategic limb removal, I find that the game is kind of limiting itself from a, at least, gameplay perspective by really focusing a lot of your attention on the idea of cutting off limbs, which the plasma cutter happens to be excellent at, and in doing so kind of takes away any sort of interest, power, or relative use, as it were, of any of the new weapons that you'll slowly but surely start to unlock and encounter as you continue the game. Contrast that with something like, say, I don't know, a game that it takes a lot of liberal design philosophies from. How about Resident Evil, or Resident Evil 4 specifically? Notice that in that game you start with a basic pistol, you end up getting a shotgun fairly early in the game, then you get a sniper rifle, then you'll get larger explosive weaponry, you'll get better versions of pistol, shotguns, and sniper rifles. You'll also have options of offshoots such as TMP, automatic, automatic rifles. You'll also have, of course, the mine launcher, things like that. And none of them, while some are, how do I put this? While some are more effective than others in a general sense, you always end up having a pistol, you have a shotgun, you usually have a sniper rifle. Why? Because all three of those particular weapon variants have their specific uses throughout the game. Different contextual situations call for different weaponry. This game, you would think, would fall under the same category design-wise, since, again, it's taking quite a bit from Resident Evil 4. The general control scheme's very similar to that. The presentation's very similar to it in many respects, though there's not any QTEs as far as I'm concerned in terms of cutscenes or anything like that. It's mostly just in terms of combat. There's quite a few callbacks, really, to Resident Evil 4 in this, but it seems like, though, the designers at Redwood decided that they were going to take a lot of the visual and some design elements from Resident Evil 4 as sort of a benchmark or a starting point. It's as though they really did not understand why on earth there were multiple different weapons to be used in Resident Evil 4. And instead, while offering multiple weapons, they don't really give much of a reason through either enemy encounter, through general game design, they don't really give any purpose to them other than the fact that it's just yet another thing to hunt around in extra areas in the stage just to unlock them, and then it's something to grind money, in this game credits for. I don't know, it's just kind of a weird, less than thrilling design decision. Was not very happy about that when I started really kind of realizing that. That happened about Chapter 3. Thank you for that. I totally need to know that a med kit with a giant red cross on it, rather in this case a white cross, but still it's the universal symbol of hospitals, or medical care rather. Definitely need to be reminded what a med kit is. And here we go. Audio logs, yet another thing I absolutely cannot stand. Because really, what tells the story better? Me seeing a bunch of dead bodies and blood-soaked walls and floors leading in trails to back rooms that are dark and scary? No, that doesn't tell a story, the developers seem to say. No, let's just pepper little pick-up collectibles that have little audio bits and cues that tell you things that you probably already know, like necromorphs bad, humans dying, corpses reanimating, things of this nature. Very lazy storytelling. There was at one point people thought that was a future for storytelling in games, that would be somehow more immersive and more effective. Every single year after that was introduced, which I believe is a old PC trick, I want to say like Warren Spector's games, Deus Ex, Thief, I believe used variants of maybe not audio logs, but like text logs, which then sort of led to audio logs. See them a lot in BioShock, System Shock. Hell, most of your major modern first-person shooters, as a matter of fact, are utilizing that as some sort of, I don't know, some form of brevity towards storytelling. Well, we don't actually know how to write a narrative in terms of a plot, but we can totally give you small, little non-sequitur-esque narrative threads that don't really go anywhere, but are supposed to build the world, which they don't do very well. But anyway, so we've got we got a message coming in. Getting really neat use of the HUD. I really am impressed by that.
Isaac, we ran into more of them on the way over here. Are you okay?
More
No.
what? What the hell are those things? Is that the crew?
Keep your voice down. Whatever they are, they're not friendly, and half the doors
Well, no.
of the ship are locked because of the quarantine.
And you assume they can hear you too.
No, we
You're
have to
making
get-
a lot of assumptions. I don't
First,
trust you.
We gotta repair the tram system.
You're crazy, Hammond. You're gonna get us all killed.
If you listen to me, I will get you out of here alive. Now what's wrong with the tram?
I don't know. What do you think is wrong with the tram? It's messed up. It's foobar. Totally foobar. The whole thing's foobar.
There's also a broken tram blocking the tunnel that needs to be repaired. Damn it. Everything is on the other side of this quarantine. We can't reach it from here.
Okay.
We can't. But you can. Isaac, if I can get to the bridge, I should be able to access the personnel files. You fix the tram, and I'll help you find Nicole.
Okay. Right on. Okay, so back. Really irritating too. They actually add audio on top of this dumb menu. In some cases. Now, back to the plot for a second, because I know I mentioned it wasn't really much to talk about. It really isn't. It is probably one of the most hokey, generally cliche. I mean, it's basically every single trope and stereotype imaginable in a sci-fi setting such as this that you could throw at it. It does nothing particularly new to further the genre, move things forward. It's pretty rote. Basically, long story short, Isaac Clarke gets a distress signal call from his, I guess, girlfriend, fiance, Nicole, I think her name is. I don't know. She's kind of a throwaway character at this point. She going by as far as I've gotten in the game, she really seems to have very little standing or effect on the plot or any of the characters for that matter, including Isaac Clarke, our standard silent protagonist. Another unfortunate trend in modern game design, unfortunately. Thanks Half-Life 2. One game does it well, and then every game's going to do it until all of a sudden you realize everyone's mute. In the case of this game, though, we have this distress signal from Nicole, whatever her name is, his girlfriend, Isaac's girlfriend, or fiance, or significant other. Distress signal, she's obviously upset, under duress, etc. So Isaac Clarke and this sort of small team of some security detail guys, a couple of pilots, a scientist for some reason, and of course Isaac the engineer, the one guy I guess who could fix things. They're coming in to, I guess, figure out what's going on this big old ship called the Ishimura. Yet another kind of odd roundabout reference to Alien. The Ishimura, I'm not entirely sure. I have to look that up. I believe Ishimura refers to, it's either a person or a particular maybe a book or a particular story, I forget, but it is a sort of over-the-top, very vaguely alien, very foreign name. Ishimura, I believe, is of Japanese, it is of Japanese descent as far as that name and nomenclature go, which is kind of a weird reference to Alien in the sense that the ship in Alien was referred to as the Nostromo. Also, you could argue it could be a odd reference also to the fact that I guess, is it a ship or whatever the hell they're riding around in the Matrix in the real world? It's called the Nebuchadnezzar. So this is kind of like just sort of starting with Alien, a sort of long line of oddly high-faultin named ships that really do not reflect at all what the name is supposed to reflect, I guess. So anyway, we're on the ship, and obviously shit's gone wrong. We're in it bad right now. And these two apparently are the only survivors beyond Isaac Clarke. Big shock here, because we were the only three named in the little intro splash page. Hint, hint. And so now it is our job and duty apparently to, I don't know, it kind of straddles the line. Sometimes we're trying to fix the ship, sometimes we're trying to get off the ship, and sometimes we're constantly reminded that our girlfriend is still somewhere on the ship, which I think is a absolute load of crap and probably a big-ass MacGuffin, but that's just me. I feel like, I think as a framing device it's kind of interesting, and had they played around with it a bit more, probably would have been really cool. I mean, you could have argued that, well, Isaac Clarke, he's like a low-level engineer and somehow talked his way onto this particular engineering repair mission because the place he's going happens to have his girlfriend and he hasn't seen her in like 10 years, and maybe they're kind of estranged and haven't seen each other in quite a while, and maybe they're like a divorced couple or something. Like, that already would have been a hell of a lot more interesting, but I'm sure there's plenty of focus groups that would disagree with me on that and say that's just too much. That's too mature. That's too mature. It's amazing how a plot concept that should only give you maybe a teen rating would immediately, like, make everyone kind of bored, but then, like, you know, as long as you're shooting and cutting things in half, that's okay. Also, too, actually, funny little details here. I like this sort of odd design element of the vending machines here. I remember when I first ran through this room, and I'd see them fairly regularly throughout the game. You can't do anything with them. I mean, they're just static 3D objects, but I just kind of, again, I like the way they're designed. It's very utilitarian. It's like, it is futuristic, but it's not in a futuristic sense. It's not like a Jetsons future or even like a sort of clean, interesting future. It's very much, again, a very utilitarian, very just basically designed. Oh, look, it's got a robot arm. Like, that's basically the only thing separating it from any other vending machine here on this planet, which I always appreciate. I mean, there's a lot of these sort of futurists like Sid Mead and guys like that who have this like exceptional, like, ridiculous imagination where they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna have like everything's fucking chromed out and everything looks like Mass Effect, and yeah, I mean, yeah, maybe, but like I would actually argue something like this would make more sense, especially in terms of space travel. I mean, you don't need decadence when you're traveling in space. I mean, the very thought of it is that you're probably going to be, you know, in some form of stasis anyways while traveling to whatever destination you're going to. So it doesn't have to be luxurious. That's just kind of goofy. It's almost pointless. It is pointless. Why would I want a luxury cruise liner to just sleep on for 10 years so that I get to Mars in one piece? So that I wake up and I have like a bowl of caviar and maybe a glass of Chardonnay? Like, that's stupid. Whereas something like this, as murky and as sort of depressing as it may seem from a visual perspective, technically makes a heck of a lot more sense because, again, we're just using this as a delivery vessel, if anything. I mean, yes, the Imshimura is technically a what do they call it? A planet cracker or something like that. It's basically a mining ship, you know, like a deep space mining facility slash giant boat, essentially. It grabs cargo, it deposits cargo, etc. That's all it does. And the people on board really are designed to do that. They research the cargo, they'll actually mine, they'll do all that. They don't have really much use for a luxury cruise, right? They might like it, but again, it really doesn't make much sense. Just sort of an interesting little, I guess, rant about futurism in sci-fi, as it were. And of course, one last thing to mention too, you can't mention anything like that without mentioning the fact that technically Ridley Scott did that in Alien as well. That was one of the main design conceits of the film, based around both the screenplay, which was written by what was his name? Dan O'Bannon, and of course the general visual design elements that were kind of, you could argue the cinematographer and H.R. Giger obviously had a hand in it, and most certainly they did, but it was very, very much dictated in quite a big fashion by Ridley Scott. His particular storyboardings, his very specific design elements, etc. I think you'll find, actually, we're going to be mentioning Ridley Scott quite a bit throughout this replay, or rather this play, this Let's Play, this extended play, however we want to look at it. As he's very, very important in terms of science fiction from a fictional perspective, and from just a film perspective and a game perspective. But it's also very hard to separate, very hard to separate Ridley Scott, Alien from this particular game. The two have a lot in common, as it were. Also, here's a potential jump scare that's been averted. Which you'll see that a lot, and it is kind of, it's not really an irritant. It doesn't irritate me. The very idea or notion of it is bad. It's not. But I feel, and I've read it in many criticisms of the game, the Dead Space, for whatever reason, the Redwood guys in California, they decided, okay, we're gonna use a lot of excessive jump scares. And while okay on the face, There's nothing quite wrong with that. What transpires, what actually is caused, what issue is caused there is that eventually you start to catch all the little tells that let you know that, oh no, a jump scare is coming. Whether it be random corpse on the ground that I know wasn't there 10 seconds ago, or, you know, oh hey, look, there's a vent that just happens to be right next to the door that I happen to have my next objective through. I bet something will pop through there. Eventually you start to become ostensibly smarter than the game designers while playing. It's actually an interesting trope of horror films, especially when watching in a theater, or watching them in a theater. But I'm noticing it very often throughout this game. As a matter of fact, you see it quite often. This conceit where, from just a design element perspective, you'll say, well, I know what this means, you know, oh, I've seen that before, I know exactly where this is going to lead.
This is Benson, Tram Engineering.
We go, another audio log.
Smith killed one. Listen, forget about shooting him in the body. You gotta cut off the limbs. Grab a cutter, anything like that. Cut them apart.
Alright, so here we go. That's, I believe, that was the first, that might have been like the first actual reference to cutting them apart or cutting the limbs off, etc. I believe we're going to get another one in the form of the security detail chief who's still alive. Here we go.
Careful. Shooting them in the body didn't seem to work. Go for the limbs. Dismember them. That should do the job.
Not to mention the fact that... Here we go, number 3. We literally, within the span of 15 seconds, we've got not one, but 3 different examples of the game telling me about a major a major design philosophy within the game. All within the span of 15 seconds, all from 3 different sources. An audio log, actual in-game dialogue that you cannot skip, ostensibly, because it does come in the span of this hallway, and of course a contextual HUD menu. Why? Because, I don't know, I'm assuming the designers just do not trust a player enough, or at least what their focus test group assumed would be a player, to just sort of, you know, come to these conclusions and start to pick this out. Especially considering the audio log basically gives it away anyways. Even going as far as, hey, Tom got one, I think we figured it out, etc. Like, come on, guys. You know, I mean, come on. My assumption being is that the audio log, the designers probably didn't think you'd find it, because the designers assumed that you'd be using the in-game tell me where to go button, this little action right here, on a Xbox One or 360 controller. It's by clicking the right analog stick. I assumed they figured people would just be using that ostensibly to tell you where to go, so that you would just funnel yourself directly to the next objective. But you'll be seeing me use that a lot. Not so much to tell me where to go per se, but rather where not to go, so that I don't necessarily continue the story. Sometimes I actually do enjoy exploring. Especially in survival horror games like this. They tend to be full of little details that you will miss, unless you're at least conscious of the fact that you don't have to just go to the next objective and complete it. Right. Okay, so here's something interesting. This one... This is primarily, really, this is kind of a two-part item, sort of, the stasis module. It's got 2 aspects to it that are kind of useful in terms of the story. Number 1, it's a very good puzzle solver, and what I mean by that is that primarily most of the, quote, puzzles you'll encounter throughout Dead Space are of the sort where you'll have a piece of machinery, very similar to this door, as a matter of fact. You have a piece of machinery malfunctioning, moving too quickly. It'll be somehow blocking your way, or making your way impassable in some form or fashion. And the stasis module, specifically what it does, if you hold the L button, hit X, slows down malfunctioning machinery. Now, the game doesn't really go forward in explaining why that is the case. I don't even have a logical explanation for why that's even possible within this universe. We're just given the item and told to accept it as a puzzle-solving mechanic. I can live with it, and I don't necessarily take points off for it, but if I were in the nitpicky mood, I would probably give the game an F solely based on that aspect. joking aside, though, it doesn't really explain itself very well. Again, we're just sort of given it and told to go with the flow. Not a deal breaker necessarily, but it's not. It doesn't. It's just sort of superfluous almost. It's like they just sort of throw that in because, well, they had to have something to stop us from moving forward too fast. That wasn't just massive amounts of enemies and general unease in terms of environmental detail. Now the second method, or the second use for it, now this use actually has a little more weight to it, as you'll probably see me using it more often in this context than in the puzzle solving sort, is that it can also be used on enemies, specifically enemies that are moving towards you, trying to kill you, cut your head off, stuff like that. You notice throughout the game that the necromorphs in this title are the enemies, as it were, move extremely fast. They don't attack extremely fast, at least not on the medium difficulty. I believe on hard and on the hardest difficulty mode, I forget what it's called, but you unlock it after beating the game, going through the game once. The enemies actually, they have very little delay between movement and attack, so I could see where this particular with this particular maneuver would be useful, but the stasis charge as it goes, that's what you'll see it used more often than not. Is when used on an enemy, it'll slow them down, it'll keep them from some enemies it basically stops them in motion, others it'll slow them down to such a degree that it's almost laughable to see it in action, and from there you'll get enough time to basically fine-tune a few good shots on enemies. Now here's a really good example of lighting in the game. Notice, good lord, look at how nice that looks. You'll notice glows throughout the game, especially in the near or pitch dark environments that you'll be kind of going through in Dead Space. You'll notice a couple of very interesting details, specifically regarding Isaac's suit, which I think, at least from a technical perspective, is really impressive. And the fact that they got this to work on PlayStation 3, Xbox 360 in the way that it did, I've seen the game run on both consoles, it's actually pretty impressive. Now the PC, obviously, you'll get a few extra details here and there, but generally speaking, notice I don't even know if you can technically see it. Number one, you'll see the flashlight on the plasma cutter. Very nice. Again, sort of an odd design nod to Resident Evil 4. It's very, very particular to that. Also Silent Hill to some degree. The idea of just a constantly usable flashlight, I guess, is sort of a survival horror trope nowadays. But you also notice, and I don't know if you can see it, but on this small little column, the steel rod or column here built into the wall, you'll notice that Isaac's visor is actually glowing a cool green shade over the wall. Really neat little detail there.